Sometimes, God speaks to his servant through silence. When you can't make sense of a situation, maybe God isn't giving you an answer, because he's already answering the real question you haven't dared to ask. Does this person truly belong in your life, or is it time for them to be taken away? And if you resist that question, God doesn't respond with words. He responds with weariness. Weariness isn't just of the body, it's the cry of the soul. If you constantly have to explain yourself, it means the person you're speaking to doesn't hear you. If you constantly have to forgive, that heart may not deserve to stay beside yours. And if you keep silent all the time, it's because you know that once you speak, everything will end. These are the ways in which God speaks, not through words, but through ache. And with every moment of silence, God distances you from that person. So you must ask yourself, is carrying the weight of someone who exhausts you a form of divine loyalty, or just self-deception? According to Ibn Arabi, sometimes God disciplines his servant not with love, but with exhaustion. Because humans don't easily let go of what they're used to. But if what you've become attached to is pulling you away from God, then he won't send conflict. He'll send silence. And if you truly listen to that silence, letting go becomes easier. But if you keep resisting, you'll slowly diminish, day by day. At first, you just say, "I'm tired." But then you realize, this fatigue isn't even entirely yours. You carry their emotions, you soothe their anger, you ease their tension, you interpret their silence, and in the end, you carry both their weight and your own. That's when God is warning you, not with words, but with the burden on your back. Ibn Arabi says, if God wants to take something away from you, he makes it heavy. What once felt light and easy now sits like a stone in your chest. The conversations have ended. The words tire you. Even their gaze no longer brings peace. But still, you pray for patience. Still, you tell yourself, this is just a test. Still, you hope. Maybe they'll change. But at that very moment, God is pulling you away. Not because he's abandoned you, but because you're still not calling on him. You're still trying to save the other person. But remember, sometimes the person you're trying to save is the one who's drowning you. In Sufism, everything carries a sign, and a heart that fails to read the signs repeats itself. You keep meeting the same kinds of people. You keep saying the same things. You keep reliving the same conflicts. And each time you ask, why is it always me? The answer is simple. Because you're still trying to protect your own self, not the heart that God is trying to protect. You still want them to stay, but God wants you to stay present within, to protect your heart, to not let your soul be shattered. So when someone keeps exhausting you, it's not a test, it's a sign. But we don't cling to signs. We cling to habits, not to love, but to the emptiness we've grown used to. Because the heart struggles to let go of what it's become attached to. Yet God teaches us the most by shaking the foundations of our attachments. If you love someone but no longer feel the divine light in them, that love wasn't given to you. It was only a reflection, a form. Ibn Arabi gives a sharp warning here. Behind every form is either a light or a shadow, And if you keep clinging to the shadow, the light will leave you. So how does this distancing happen? Your prayers begin to change. You no longer want them, but you can't erase their name either. Being with them isn't enough, but being apart makes the emptiness grow. And this is how God speaks to you. He doesn't let go of you, but He wants you to let go. Because some forms only become mercy when you release your grip. If you insist on staying with that person, your heart will begin to close to God. Because your heart is being filled by one person, the wrong person. Sometimes separation, leaving, feels like loss from the outside. But in Sufism, some separations are actually another form of closeness. Ibn Arabi says, there are forms that, when you distance yourself from them, you draw closer to truth. When you step away from someone, you don't just walk away from a person, you break free from an illusion. And when they're gone, what remains isn't emptiness, it's clarity. The veil that was covering you has now been torn. Separation is painful, but sometimes the first gift of separation is the reunion with yourself. You had gotten used to their presence, to thinking about them, being patient with them, fixing them. But you had forgotten yourself. Every moment you stayed with them, you silenced a voice within you. And now, that voice echoes. I'm still here. You realized the greatest loneliness wasn't when they left. It was while they were still with you. Now there's silence, but it's full. Because you're no longer alone. You're closer to yourself. And this closeness is the heart's most open state to divine mercy. Maybe when you held on to someone, you were turning your back to God. But now you walk without leaning on anyone, and with every step, you feel lighter. Because now, you are no longer the one carrying the burden. You are the one being carried. Ibn Arabi says, God does not always protect His servant by holding on. Sometimes He protects by pulling everything else away. And that pulling away is not your destruction. It is the beginning of your reconstruction. The day you walked away from that person, you became a different heart. A heart that knows its limits, listens to its silence, and awaits its peace. And if that person still hasn't come back, know this: their absence is more blessed than your staying ever could be. Maybe your prayer was for their return, but God didn't give you a return. He gave you a transformation. Because you prayed, "Save me," and He did. But you're still grieving the version of you that was rescued. Don't forget, salvation can sometimes look like abandonment. Sometimes God doesn't pull someone out of your life all at once. He slowly creates distance between you. He gives you time. Because He knows you too well. He knows that if He tore them away suddenly, you'd shatter. If you faced the truth too quickly, your heart would break. So instead of removing them, He cools their closeness. He shortens their words. He increases the moments that no longer bring you joy. He slowly wears down your patience, your attention, your inner strength. Because God doesn't always sever. Sometimes He distances slowly. And if you still don't understand, He gives you exhaustion. But if you still say, "I must endure despite the weariness," then strength no longer comes to you. Because what you're trying to endure God has already begun removing from your life. Ibn Arabi says, "When God calls his servant to himself, but the servant keeps gazing at another human, they may look, but they can't see. They may hear, but they can't listen. You're still trying to reach them, and as they grow distant, it feels like something is missing. But it's not them you're losing. It's the divine light that once surrounded them. Because every human is entrusted with a divine light. But you fell in love with the image, not the light. That image is now hollow. And if you remain there, the emptiness will pull you in too. Some people exhaust you because they are mirrors. And in them, you don't just see them, you see your own lack. But you don't realize it. You still wait for their love, their understanding, their attention. But God is pulling you away from their attention because you're still standing on that attention. And when one soul becomes dependent on another soul's attention, God intervenes because he does not want your heart shared. So what does he do? He makes them cold or makes you cold toward them. But in every case, he is protecting you. In Sufism, every exhaustion is a sign. If you are drained, not just physically, but spiritually, that's not a test. It's an invitation to transformation. Some people don't just enter your life, they occupy your inner world, and you don't live with their presence. You survive their weight. You feel like you'll explode if you don't speak. But even if you speak, nothing changes. Inside, one question loops endlessly. Why am I so tired? And if you've reached the point where you don't even ask God anymore, or can't even ask yourself, then that person has become a veil. Ibn Arabi says, "A veil is not in front of the eyes, it's inside the heart." If you still believe they're good for you, but nothing feels good anymore, that belief has become an illusion. And without breaking free from illusion, you cannot reach truth. If that person no longer carries you, and worse, becomes a burden to you. If your silence no longer works, because even in silence you're screaming inside, then know this: that relationship has moved from the realm of mercy to the realm of discomfort. And God will not leave you there. But if you insist on staying, then He will leave. He will go silent, and that's where the deepest loneliness begins. The fight has ended, but peace hasn't arrived, because you're still there. They're still there, but God isn't. This emptiness is not abandonment, it's opportunity. When you stop expecting God from a person, God returns to your heart. When you stop seeing a human as your source, you return to the true source. And then, the tiredness lifts, because you're no longer carrying the weight. You know when humans feel most exhausted? When they still want something that's already gone. The reason you're so tired is because you still think that person is yours. But God has already taken them back to Himself, and you're just holding on to a shadow. So your exhaustion isn't from a person. It's from the collapse of an illusion. Yes, it hurts, but you're also being set free. And then one morning, without even realizing, you say a quiet prayer. God, I'm at peace with this. And in that moment, the bond you thought would never break unravels effortlessly. Hearing their name no longer stings. Closing your eyes no longer brings their image. Because now, that space has been filled with divine tranquility. Only then do you realize God didn't just save you from them, He saved you from the burden they placed on you. According to Ibn Arabi, if God removes an image from your life, a door to truth is being opened, and when you walk through that door, no one is left behind. Because every person who wore you down was actually God pulling you back to Himself. Sometimes, the one who constantly exhausted you is your greatest healer, but only once they leave. Because some people make you sick when they stay, but bring healing once they're gone, and God prepares that healing slowly, just like you were slowly broken. And finally, remember this: if the one who wears you down isn't leaving, maybe it's because you haven't forgiven them in your heart. Because what doesn't leave your heart can't leave your life. And sometimes, God is just waiting for your surrender. So say this prayer: My God, I don't want to keep anyone in my heart who doesn't bring me closer to you. And then wait, because after this prayer, they'll either become better or they'll leave. And both are mercy. Both will bring you closer to God.